Everyone. I want to reintroduce you to Kathryn, our beloved contributor at Writer Unboxed, our friend. She is the author of two novels, The Art of Falling and The Far End of Happy, both stories that seek beauty and meaning at the edge of darkness. She is a freelance developmental editor at writerpartner.com and has been since 2006. She also teaches at Drexel University's MFA program and runs a year-long small group mentorship program called Your Novel Year, which I've heard is excellent. She also served as the 2020 guiding scribe for the Women's Fiction Writers Association. She will now present a 15-minute mini session on the most common ways that writers stall their story. Take it away, Kathryn. I will cross my fingers.
Thanks, Therese, and thank you to everybody who has come back to see the slideshow portion of this presentation. Over my 15 years as a developmental editor, I've seen a lot of problems that are evident across many different kinds of manuscripts. Interestingly, the ones I'm going to share with you today are often born of a writer's desire to make their work more interesting. But let's look at why instead these issues can make a narrative, and hopefully not a PowerPoint, slow to a crawl. So I am going to share my screen and press a few magic buttons, and I'll be back with you in one moment. Here we go. 13 of the most common story stalling techniques I have seen in manuscripts that I've edited. Sometimes writers think that if they don't tell important aspects of the story, the reader will be just dying to know by the time they get around to telling us. This is not usually the case. If you fail to give the reader enough information to orient her to the kind of story arc the protagonist will be engaging with, you'll fail to raise the kind of questions that tip the reader into the story. Meaning that by the time you deliver what you've mistakenly thought of as a plot twist, your reader will be long gone. To address this issue, in my session, Get This Story Moving, we'll take a look at the difference between surprise, which is a kind of one-off, and the way to build suspense that keeps on giving. Detectives in mysteries reflect on clues. Politicians in thrillers reflect on strategy. Lovers in romance review their emotions. But you only earn the right to reflect after new information forces your protagonist to reassess everything she once thought was true. Another kind of reiteration that writers often don't even know that they're doing is to show the protagonist plan how something will go down, then show the plan going exactly as planned, and then show the protagonist rehashing that event to all the other important characters. This may be an easy way to beef up your daily word count, but it will bore your reader. And it's not an effective way to emphasize the importance of a plot point. To address this situation, we'll be looking at the role of prediction in fiction, how to make recaps more impactful, and how to make your plot points memorable enough that you need not rely on reiteration at all. Once a character does you the favor of sharing his voice with you, it's so hard for us writers to edit what he says. I'll encourage you to take your power back. Dialogue can be an effective multitasker, and if it accomplishes only one thing, it can be working much harder for you. Greetings and goodbyes, ordering food in restaurants, introductions, telephone niceties, much can be assumed. We'll look at how dialogue can move your story forward, not just through spoken words, but through setting, body language, and bits of action. Simply put, don't use 12 words when one or two would do. The reader should not have to wade through your verbiage to find the story. Besides, prose edited for concision is magical. It holds together by a kind of magnetism that charges all the words that remain. While drafting, every writer creates a great big batch of words. As author, it's your job to carve your story from them. To address this topic, we'll look at ways to increase your sensitivity to the all-important question, how do you know which words are the right ones? Standing, sitting, cogitating, turning, leaning in. These are not riveting story actions and serve as a pertinent metaphor for a story that isn't moving. If the opening of your story shows someone sitting around ruminating about a time in the past, just change it now. This kind of establishing shot can work for movies, but doesn't translate well to the page. Why? Your opening should orient the reader to the nature of your novel, and you don't want her thinking your entire story will play out in your character's head. To address this issue, we'll look at ways to make your interior passages move the story forward. Silence can be powerful if held in reserve for an important moment. On a regular basis, though, I see things like, he froze, unable to speak. Since this does nothing to deepen characterization, best figure out what his reaction might be. How a character reacts when under stress is an important way we get to know who they really are. We'll look at ways to get a rise out of even the most stoic characters so they can make themselves known, even if we don't have access to their point of view. Plot is one way fiction writers manage reader expectation. So when a man crosses the line of propriety in using employee data software at his law firm, the reader's thinking, oh, this could be good. But then, if nothing happens and he doesn't get in trouble or have to talk his way out of it or anything, there's no story. Or maybe you're writing about a girl who's determined to show her doubting mother that she's a good enough rider to warrant her own horse, but then rides her borrowed horse hard at the horse show, despite the fact that she knows he's injured. She worries about it all day long. The horse starts to limp, ... But when mom shows up in the stands, all goes well. To avoid wasting your reader's kind attention, we'll look at how bringing stakes into active play will help drive your story forward. Routines. We humans have so many of them. Waking, eating, and sleeping cycles, a morning run, repetitive duties at work. You need to understand the normal rhythms of your character's day, absolutely, but your reader doesn't. As a reader, have you ever said, oh, thank God this suburban mom is finally going grocery shopping because I feared she was running out of food? My guess is no. If your scenes don't push the story forward in a specific way, that will prove to be relevant to the question raised in the reader's mind at the outset of the story. Just leave that routine scene out, or work harder to earn its inclusion. Otherwise, these routines will stall your story. To address this, we'll look at how to imply routines while advancing your specific story. And we'll start with how to make that grocery store scene more relevant. Maybe to show your fiercely competitive surgeon has a soft side, you suddenly have him volunteer at a nursing home on Saturdays. Or maybe your doctor leaves the hospital drama you've so carefully built to suddenly find his bliss while rock climbing in the wild. These new scenes will drag on the narrative unless you tie them into the ongoing drama in some relevant way. To address this, we'll talk about how to make plot diversions tie back into your forward moving story. Let's say your female protagonist fears that her telecommunications company might soon crash down around her. She thinks, I'm going to march into Paul's office and find out what he knows about the irregularities in these financial records. Instead, Paul's annoying secretary waylays her and regurgitates her whole life story, and the protagonist allows this. Or even worse, the protagonist encourages this, derailing her own story by thinking, this thing with Paul can just wait until another time. Right now, I'm dying to know where his secretary gets her nails done. This stalls the story and makes the protagonist seem ineffective. We'll look at how scene goals can drive your story forward. Look at how far away those people are down there. As one of the little occupants gets into his car and leaves for work and accidentally backs right over his trash can, it's hard to guess what he's thinking or feeling or why this matters to the story. This vast psychological distance is especially problematic during the big climactic fight, which is where I often find it, as the author pulls back to show us a lot of different things going down all at once. Ordering what is happening is your job as author, as is sinking us readers deeply enough into the characters' perspectives to care. We'll look at why deeper point of view can be your ally in building a story that moves. You've set the expectation that you will be delivering one kind of story, say a close third-person account of an old woman's long, slow death while surrounded by her contentious family. But then, fearing your tale has gotten boring, you add a gas explosion that sets the hospital on fire, and hand-to-hand combat as characters race for the stairwells, because action adds movement. And wait for it, a hot sex scene as a doctor and nurse grab the gusto in what might be their last moments. Because the reader wasn't expecting a thriller or a bodice ripper, even such action-packed additions will come across as if ripped from the pages of someone else's book, and your reader just won't care. Your exciting additions now stand between your reader and the further progression of the women's fiction she thought she was reading. We'll talk about how to raise the right genre-specific question in the reader's mind and why addressing this problem might send you back to the opening of your book, where that expectation was first raised. Scene by scene, the way your character deals with the obstacles he faces will apply pressure that results in moments of incremental change. But that change will only happen if you keep your character in the pressure cooker. Once you open the lid, your story will depressurize and stall, and the tension you worked so hard to build will spill out all over the place. If your character is in deep trouble in Atlanta and you think that what he really needs is a trip to London to de-stress, his problems better come right along with him. If your character needs to escape his pressure cooker, we'll look at ways to keep his story pushing forward. That's enough about what not to do. In my session at the OnConference, Get That Story Moving, I want to point you towards solutions you can use in your current works in progress. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can tell you a personal story. I once had a developmental editing client who had all 13 of these story stalling issues at play. So there's absolutely no shame in that. That's why people use a developmental editor. And a good writer is simply one who continues to address the problems until there are no longer any obstacles standing between the story he has been meaning to build and the reader's enjoyment of it. This guy proved to be a good writer. It did take him a few years because there were a lot of different issues to address, but he did so, and I'm thrilled to say that he was eventually offered a publishing deal for that same novel. I'm hoping the same thing for you, and that's why I'm giving my one session called Get That Story Moving, and I hope you'll come so we can get your story moving as well.
Wait, I have to use the proper emojis. Clap, clap. Clap, 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 clap. Thank you so much, Kathryn. You are an angel for doing this a second time for us,
No
and
problem.
I really appreciate it. So I will see you backstage in just a moment, friend. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone, for watching. I hope to see you at the OnConference. There are, don't forget, there are just a few days left to purchase early bird tickets. On September 1st, the early bird vanishes. So check us out. Thank you.